social issues. Joining me now to discuss health care and other hot topics, Senator Marco Rubio. Senator, always great to see you.
Great to see you.
So let's begin with Venezuela. I know that this is a topic that's close to your heart, so many similarities with Cuba. The president has called Nicolás Maduro a dictator. Economic sanctions have been placed on Venezuela. Are you satisfied with the direction the administration has taken on Venezuela and on the president's commitment?
Yeah, I think the direction he's taken has actually been great, and you've seen strong bipartisan support. You've seen international support. One of the things I hope people will notice is that with each step the United States has taken to sanction individuals, countries in the region have joined us. Over 40-some-odd countries have condemned it, just like we have. Multiple countries in the hemisphere, including Panama and others, have imposed the exact same sanctions that we have. So the region is together, and through Venezuela, this administration, in a bipartisan way, has unified the Western Hemisphere on a cause in ways we haven't seen, I don't know, probably 35, 40 years.
I guess the next question is, by many, should oil be the next step in that direction to impose
Well,
sanctions?
you know, I'll leave the announcement of the specific sanctions to the White House. Suffice it to say that I think they're going to be very strategic about what they do. None of it is intended to hurt the Venezuelan people. It is my opinion oil sanctions would not hurt the Venezuelan people because they're not benefiting from oil. But there are other measures as well, and they'll be targeted and incremental and done in an appropriate way, and usually triggered by something. The Maduro regime does something, and there's a response. So I think the general direction is a very positive one, and it has it's in our national interest.
But is there a resistance to imposing sanctions on oil because it would significantly affect our gas prices?
You know, I think it's something that could be surmounted if that's what happened. Between the use of our strategic reserves, Canadian oil and the like, we could figure out a way to get through it. I think the impact would be, quite frankly, less than a lot of people are saying it would be, given all the studies that have been done. But there are other measures in place as well that could be pursued. Bottom line is, it's not, I wouldn't call it resistance. I would call it a thoughtful understanding of the implications of each step so that we can do the cost and benefit analysis of it. But the White House has been great, the President's been great, the National Security Council Director, H.R. McMaster, the Vice President, and now the new Chief of Staff, John Kelly, who's an expert on the Western Hemisphere from his years here in Miami at Southern Command.
Let's talk about the head of the opposition, Leopoldo Lopez, who was taken by government forces, as the former Caracas mayor, Antonio Ledesma. Have you heard about them?
Well, Ledesma was released, and I should say released back to house arrest. Leopoldo's family has not been able to have contact with him or his lawyers as of the moment that we've done this interview. That may have changed, but in any event, you know, it wasn't surprising, and I think you're going to see more of that in the weeks to come and in the days to come. There's no doubt they're moving in this direction. They think they can get away with it. I think the one thing that's been the most impactful on the Maduro regime is the sheer volume of countries, from the European Union to all of their neighbors in the hemisphere to their expulsion from Mercosur. The regional rejection of what they are doing is unprecedented in the region.
And of course there are questions now of voter tampering from last week. But let's address, more importantly, the fact that you were given the unique opportunity to address the Venezuelan people in a televised address. What was the reaction?
Well, obviously we don't hear a lot of direct reaction because there's a lot of limited communication here directly with people in Venezuela. And the purpose of it was the station over there came to us and said, would you like to do a video to be able to explain to the people of Venezuela why the United States cares about this issue? And it was an opportunity to directly communicate with the people of the country. And my message was pretty clear. I mean, my motivation on this obviously is formed by growing up in a community that's been shaped by the tragedies of the hemisphere, but also to understand that all we are asking for and all we are doing is supporting the vast majority of the Venezuelan people whose simple request is have elections. Have elections for president, have elections for the governorships and the legislative branch, recognize the National Assembly and allow them to work, respect the constitutional order of the Chavez Constitution. That's the only request. Whoever wins the election wins the election. And that's not unreasonable. I think that's the moral position to hold. And so the message was that, to ensure they understood that. And I think the people in Venezuela do. They're well educated and well informed.
You mentioned Cuba, and just a few weeks ago you were here in Little Havana with the president to make an announcement on the new Cuba policy. Are you satisfied with that policy as it is now?
Well, the regulations are being written, but I'm very satisfied going to achieve. And ultimately, one of the purposes of it, and it hasn't been covered enough, but one of the purposes of the measure was not punitive. It was to reward the private enterprise, the small entrepreneur in Cuba, which everyone who's in favor of the opening says was one of the great things that came out of the Obama change. And so what the president's policy does is it says Americans can still spend money in Cuba, but you can only spend it with the private entrepreneur, not with the military. And just 2 days ago, we see these reports that the Cuban government is cracking down on small businesses in Cuba, cracking down on these entrepreneurs. yours. So what's going to become abundantly clear to the Cuban people is that their inability to prosper, to own their own business, to make a little money, is not because of the United States. It's because of the Cuban government. They're threatened by it. So Raul Castro or his successor is going to have a fundamental decision to make here soon. Do I meet the expectations of my people and allow a private economy to flourish that doesn't depend on the government for its subsistence, or do I deny it and face the wrath of a people whose expectations have been heightened?
Okay, let's bring this back to domestic policy and, of course, health care and the lack of ability by the Senate to be able to pass significant health care reform. What happened? Because it seems to me that most Republicans ran in their election, and part of their campaign was to repeal and replace Obamacare. They have not been able to do that. Was there not a plan in place that if this were to happen and there was a Republican in the White House and Republican Senate and House of Representatives, that they would come up with a plan, a significant plan?
So it's interesting. I mean, we talked about Venezuela a moment ago. We're not Venezuela. And so we have to vote on these things. And we have 100 senators. 52 of them are Republicans. All 100 of our senators vote first and foremost with their state in mind. And so, yes, 52 Republicans support repealing and replacing Obamacare, but all 52 don't agree, or even 50 at this point, agree on the right way to do it, because you're trying to balance the different and nuances of all these different states. And that was a big factor. And so everyone here, obviously I'm disappointed because I think it's something we're going to have to address. It's something I campaigned on and kept my commitment. But ultimately, everyone's going to do what they think is in the best interest of their state. That's the way our system is designed. The Senate represents the states. The House represents the people through the districts. And I voted with Florida in mind, because I truly believe that Obamacare, as currently structured, is bad for the state of Florida. Other people might agree in regards to their state, but they wanted to see it drafted differently, and that's why you get to where we are. It's part of our system. I mean, it takes debate, and you got to balance a lot of different interests in trying to get to a result. Hopefully, we won't give up and keep working on it.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask. Are you hopeful that something can be done in regard
I am.
to
I mean,
reform?
obviously, the thing that complicates it is that in order to do it with the 50 votes plus the vice president, you have to do it through this thing called reconciliation, and that basically has to be tied to a budget. And so that window for using reconciliation closes at the end of September. A new window will open in October, but they were going to use reconciliation to do tax reform. So what we could find ourselves in a position in October of having to choose, do we do tax reform or do we do health care, because we only have one way we can only do one or the other using that vehicle, and that's really where the constraints are in terms of internally in the Senate.
Well, you mentioned tax reform. Can tax reform be tackled if health care hasn't been resolved
No,
yet?
it can be. I mean, there are some, perhaps it might impact how big it is, but it can be, and it'll be difficult for different reasons. But it should be. I mean, tax policy is important. And the area of it, look, I think tax reform is important for economic growth. A lot of the growth we're seeing in our economy, new unemployment numbers this week continue to decline. We're back to the 07 numbers before the crash. A lot of that is because the expectation in the economy is we're going to do tax reform. If that doesn't happen, the counter reaction to not meeting that expectation could be equally bad for economic growth. So tax reform needs to happen first and foremost just to prevent the markets from reacting negatively, not to mention to spur on economic growth. But the part of it that I'm most involved in is the child tax credit. I want to increase the per-child tax credit for working families, including people that don't pay income tax.
You said you want to empower families with the tax reform.
We do. So what we have, there's an existing child credit that you get per child, and I want to increase that amount because I think raising children in the 21st century is more expensive than ever. The child care costs in most of the states in the country, child care is more expensive than college. So these are new costs that didn't exist 10, 15, 20 years ago. Our tax code needs to be modernized to address it, and that's the part of the tax code I'm going to spend a lot of time focused on.
Are you confident that that can be passed?
Well, I'm more confident about that than I am about some of the other components of it. There'll be some resistance. Some on the Democratic side will say the tax credit's not big enough, and some in my own party will say we don't need the tax credit, we just need to lower the rates for everybody. The problem is there's a lot of people out there that aren't paying federal income tax. They pay payroll tax, but if you make less than a certain amount of money, the only tax you're paying is that payroll tax, and so we've got to make sure the credit applies to that. A massive tax cut for someone that doesn't make a lot of money is not going to help them.
Right.
And that's why we need to target this for lower income working families.
When we were talking about Venezuela, you mentioned General Kelly as Chief of Staff. Are you happy with that appointment?
I think it's a great choice. I know for a fact that he'll bring a process to the White House that works well. He'll do a great job of managing the staff. By his own admission, I don't think General Kelly's job is to manage the president.
Can anyone manage the president?
Well, I think that's a great question for any president, but certainly for this president, who is an unorthodox person in terms of how he operates. And I don't think that's the expectation. I think the expectation is to surround the president with an office and that operates better, and that has a flow of information and a process by which decisions are made that's more conventional but also more professionalized. That's the hope. And I certainly think General Kelly, if anyone can do it that I know that's involved in that administration, General Kelly would be it.
You mentioned the president. How's your relationship with him now? We talked about how he has your ear on Venezuela and Cuba. How's the relationship now? Of course, it was a little tenuous during the campaign.
So, you know, that actually isn't true. I mean, we never had a bad relationship. We were competitors. It would be like asking a boxer, were you upset that the guy punched you in the face in the fourth round? I mean, in a boxing match, that's what you do. It doesn't mean you hate the person. You're in a competitive environment. As I've always I said it when I ran for office. I say it now. If the president is wrong about something, I'm going to try to change his mind. If he's right about something, I'm going to obviously support him. And if he's wrong about something and doesn't change his mind, I'm going to criticize it and try to stop it. And I've lived by that. I voted. He wasn't for the Russia sanctions bill. I was among those that supported it. On the other hand, I've been able to influence his thinking. And although ultimately the decision is his, I don't want to take credit for his decision because it was his, whether it's on Cuba or Venezuela or topics that are important to Florida. And if he's wrong about something, I'll work to change his mind and influence him in the proper direction. And if it doesn't work out, then obviously it'll be different. And when he's right, though, you know, we've got to say he's right. And in the case of Venezuela, what they have done has gained wide bipartisan support. Not credit, but support. And I think that's important, and we're going to be fair to do that, too.
We have to address Attorney General Jeff Sessions. I don't think it's a secret that the president is not happy with him right now. There are rumblings that he may want to add another Attorney General. Is this something that you would consider and you would support?
Well, first of all, the decision about Attorney General belongs to the president. Our job is to confirm.
Right.
Second, you talk about one of the areas where people say check and balance on the president. In your intro, you talked about some people that have criticized me for that. That's an area where I've disagreed with the president and done so openly. I don't believe, whether you like Jeff Sessions or not, that he's done anything worth firing. I think he's doing his job. And there is a level of independence that an Attorney General has to have from the president. While they're a member of the cabinet, they're also the chief law enforcement officer of the country. And I don't think anything Jeff Sessions has done merits his firing. I also think it's been abundantly clear that if Jeff Sessions is removed, the chairman of the committee that would have to hold hearings said there aren't going to be any hearings on a replacement, almost as a message to the president not to do that. So I don't anticipate Jeff Sessions is going to be fired, and I anticipate he'll be the Attorney General for the foreseeable future.
So if the president wanted to make a change because ultimately he wanted to get rid of Mueller, is that something that you said you would not be in favor of?
Well, assuming Bob Mueller hasn't done anything wrong, and it would be shocking to me if he did, given his history, given my interactions with him when he was FBI director. This is a man of a long history of great character, great decision making. I have full confidence that Bob Mueller is going to conduct a fair and thorough investigation, that at the end of his work we're going to know what happened one way or the other. And assuming he does nothing wrong, and I don't anticipate he would, he should not be fired. It would be a terrible mistake to fire him. I think it would be truly problematic if the White House did it, and I would advise them. I think the best thing for the president and for the White House is to allow this investigation to move forward and uncover everything as quickly and as soon as possible. It's the best thing for them. It is most certainly the best thing for the country, and it's the right thing to do.
Okay, we have to discuss something that I know that you're very proud of, and you co-sponsored a bill for veterans. And there are going to be, I believe, 7 new veterans health facilities here in the state of Florida. Tell us a little bit.
Well, we have over 1.5 million veterans in the state of Florida, the 3rd largest in the whole country. About half of those veterans are in the VA system now. And one of the challenges they run into, and if a veteran is watching, they know, is you want to go to the VA facility, but the wait times are 6 months, or they don't have the services available when you need it. And so having more VA facilities in a state as large as Florida is important. These aren't just hospitals. They're medical facilities, primary care, outpatient treatment, and the like. And so the expansion of that in our state will truly be helpful. The law I passed, the other law I passed, is one that brings accountability to the VA. And what it does is it allows the VA secretary to fire employees that aren't doing a good job. They weren't able to fire them before. And that, I think, is going to bring an improvement as well. The president signed it. We were able to work on it in a bipartisan way. So it was we've had a very productive first 6 months. The VA accountability bill, the Race for the Cure Act for pediatric cancer, the work on Cuba, the ongoing work on Venezuela. I feel really good about the progress we've made and are continuing to make.
6 months in.
6 months in.
Yeah.
Feels like longer.
Yeah, it sure does. Senator, thank you as always for joining us here on Impact. Always great to see you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And still to come here on NBC 6 Impact.